So without further ado here, we're going to welcome Chris Martenson up on the stage.
So before I was doing this, and before I'd worked my way up through the corporate ladder to become vice president of a company called SAIC, I was a scientist. And I spent my time in the lab performing basic scientific research. And I'm telling you this because I love data. I love information. And what I did, surprisingly, was I actually worked on neuronal disease processes. So I actually did some direct research into things that could mimic a disease like ALS. And what I did was I actually plated out neurons and grew them in vitro on glass. So this is a picture of neurons. And look at this. You've got these gorgeous, gorgeous living cells. And they've fully expressed themselves with dendrites and axons and synapses. And they're being really communicative with each other. They're actually talking. It's brilliant. Now, life is about experiences. And one of the experiences I had when I was growing neurons was that if I failed to feed them, what happened was they would ball up. They would lose all this rich complexity. They would skinny themselves down to the core processes that were essential to their survival. And what I learned from this was that energy and complexity are essential. These cells are complex systems. Your body is a complex system. The Earth is a complex system. These things really need to be understood. Now, this isn't some huge departure. I am going to tie these neurons into the economy at some point. But you'll have to stick with me for a few minutes. Now, one of the other things I learned along the way is that most people do not make their decisions based on information. We make our decisions based on belief. Your beliefs become your thoughts become your words become your actions become your habits become your values become your destiny. This quote from Gandhi, I think, perfectly articulates the role of beliefs in shaping our lives, not just our lives and our destiny, but our very perceptions. There's all kinds of wonderful experiments out there that show now that what we see or don't see are shaped completely by our beliefs. Really enormous things can escape our attention because we're holding a beliefs construct that information doesn't sit well with. So where I started as an information-based scientist, and I went and I dug through all the economic data, what I found was that I had to wander over into these other kind of softer worlds of psychology, of behavioral economics, to learn about things like recency bias, like baseline shifting, like discounting, how we discount risks. Because these things, finance is often presented as if it's a completely rational process, and we can just rationally work our way through the numbers and come to some rational conclusion. But I learned that it turns out humans, here's the bad news, humans are completely irrational. The good news is they're predictably irrational. Now, that's a title of a book from Dan Ariely, a behavioral economist. It's a great, great book because it tells us some really important things about where we are in this story and where we're going. There are two ways people change. The bad news is most people, by far, change through a process of pain. We have the heart attack, then we go on the diet. We suffer a huge fiscal crisis, then we start talking about austerity. At whatever level we're talking about, this is by far the most common way. I'm here today because I'm hopeful, and my work is about finding ways that we can actually change through a process of insight. Meaning, we can ingest information and digest it in a way that allows us to make changes to our behaviors on our own terms, given what the data is really telling us. Now, there's some really, really big picture stuff out there that I want to talk to you about. So what I want to do right now, we're going to take one giant step back and work our way back in towards the center of this story. So one giant step back. That's too far. Getting there. I'll start here. So the economy. You heard John Mauldin talk about how he's an optimist because there's some really incredible technological things coming along. If we're all going to drive that carbon fiber car with the fuel cell, and if we're all going to be talking to each other for free across the world instantly, we need to have a functioning economy, a really highly complex, awesome, functioning economy. So I start here, and I talk about this a lot because if we have this, lots of things are possible. When your economy falls apart, lots of things become impossible. What was possible 3 years ago in Greece is no longer possible today. So this is where I start, and I care about this a lot. But one of the things I learned, and this comes from the neurons, here they come back into your lives again, was that you can have all the economy in the world, meaning all the raw resources, all the money, all of everything you want, but if you do not have energy, you still have nothing. Energy is the master resource. And understanding where we really are in this energy story is a really big piece of information that needs to be brought in, I believe, and understood. As well, there's another 2 sets of information coming from the environment being my shorthand for the things we pull from the earth, raw natural resources, and the things we put back into the waste streams. So if you've seen the pictures of Beijing's air quality, you understand that waste stream is really, really critical. There's a point at which it becomes a huge detriment. So what I'm trying to do in my work is say, we can't look at just the economy anymore. We have to, at this point in human history, wander over and start to entertain what's happening in these other 2 E's. It's putting all 3 of these E's together. It's a really brand new dynamic thought. Nobody's ever thought of that before. Oh, well, Leonardo da Vinci said, learn how to see. Realize that everything connects to everything else. It's not a new idea. So this is a moment in history where I'm going to submit to you that it makes a lot of sense to wander outside of the world of pure economics and start to understand what the rest of the systems are telling us. And so that's what my talk is about. So we're going to focus in a little bit. I probably, with this crowd, don't have to spend very much time in this, but understanding money is really critical. I thought that Hussman did an incredible job of talking about the relationship of QE and expectations and how all of these things are driving us. But money itself, to back up even further, well, what is it? It's a claim. It's a claim on goods and services. Our money has no intrinsic value by itself. People say to me all the time, Chris, you can't eat gold. Like, well, here's a 20. Eat that. That's when I'm not in a good mood, right? That's when I'm feeling a little short and I just want to cut to the chase. And here's an important point, though. What is debt? Well, debt's a claim on money in the future. So people say, oh, but we have all this printing going on. Why aren't we in Weimar Germany? Easy, because they were overprinting money. Today, we're overprinting debt. All that happens is you separate its time. It is the time function of money is what we're messing around with when we're issuing a whole lot of debt. But it's the same process. It's just got a delay lag built into it. All right. Money then has to exist in some sort of a balance with what I'm going to call real wealth. Money has no value to anybody if you can't spend it on something. If you can't buy the yacht, buy the island, buy the house you want, buy the land, buy the medical services, money itself has no value. So it usually has to exist in some relationship to real wealth out there. What happens, though, is sometimes money and real wealth get out of balance. And when that happens, all sorts of perturbations exist, and we do our level best to sift through the data and understand where it's going. But it's not always that easy, because as I'm going to illustrate here, this isn't anything but a linear process. Now, when we start with money, this is the primary statement that we have to understand. All money systems enforce some behaviors, they punish others. We happen to have one without me casting any pros and cons on. I'm not here to say it's a good one or a bad one or to say we should have a different one. But the money system we have, and by we I mean the world, is that we loan money into existence. That means we have a debt-based money system. And that has a couple of features built into it. And it really, again, doesn't matter. I don't care whose picture's on it or anything. The IMF enforces this rule. Everybody who wants to participate in the world game of commerce has to have debt-based money. And that's the system we have established at this point in time. Now, the interesting feature, which I don't have time to really flesh out, but the one interesting feature of debt-based money is that it constantly expands exponentially. That's a feature. And we can detect that by looking at the base data. I'll just go through one piece of data. If somebody said, Chris, I'm going to give you one chart in 2 minutes to explain everything about where we are in this current crisis, I would use this. On your vertical axis, trillions of dollars of total credit market debt. That's everything, state, federal, local, corporate, household. It's all forms and expressions of debt. And across the bottom axis, we start in 1970, and we go through to 2011 on this chart. And I'm asking 2 things in this. The first is these blue upside-down pyramids. The question becomes, we baseline, we normalize at 1970, and we say, how long before total credit market debt doubled? That's a full doubling. So if we had 1 unit, we went to 2. Well, that was about 7 years. Next doubling, about 6 years. Next, maybe about 6, then 11, then 8. What this tells us is that in 4 decades, we had 5 complete doublings of total credit market debt. 4 decades, 5 doublings. If you're a scientist, there's a light blue line in here, which is an actual mathematical fit. It's a formula where we just fit a perfect math expression to this. And if you'd stripped all the identifying information off of this, didn't tell me what the data was, and said, Chris, as a scientist, what kind of a system are we looking at? I would have said, a couple of curve fits. Oh, it's an exponential system. And scientists, when they want to understand the goodness of fit between your pure math function and the data, you run a test. And that goodness of fit test gives you a range of values from 0 to 1. 0, there's no relationship between your data and the math fit that you've done. 1 is perfect, no deviation. So as we run along here and we ask the question, what is the goodness of fit? Is it 0? Is it 1? Where are we in this? As a biological scientist, I would tell you that a fit of around 0.5 becomes interesting. 0.6 is very interesting. 0.7, we're publishing. 0.8, stop the trial early. This is too good to keep from people. 0.9, there's fraud involved. What is the number? The number is 0.99. We have a 0.99 fit between a pure math exponential function and our credit market debt over the past 4 decades. Why is that important? Well, because the largest deviation ever seen in this series happens right here, starting in 2008. Everything you want to understand about broken economies, deficits exploding, everything can be explained by the simple fact that our credit market debt is no longer expanding, meaning our money system is no longer expanding in the ways it was supposed to. Critical chart, because everybody in power at the Fed, fiscal authorities, all cut their teeth and learned how the world works during these prior decades. And this is what we're trying to recreate. We need this to happen again. So first gut check would be, how likely is it that over the next decade, we're going to double credit market debt? That means we go from 52 to 104 trillion. And then the next doubling would take us to 208 trillion. What are we going to borrow that much money for? That's the first question. If you come up short, like I do, you say, probably we're not going to get back onto that path anytime soon. Not like it used to be. So by definition, we have a different future in front of us than the one we just came through. Now, this is how economists see the world. So I want everybody to work. Oh, I see a couple of scowls. All right, let me simplify this. It's a formula for growth. And we want our economy to grow. You read about any statement from Bernanke, from the Treasury Secretary, it doesn't matter. You're going to hear growth, growth, growth. We want growth. Not just any kind of growth. We want 3% real GDP growth, 6% nominal. We want our job market growing by some percentage. That's the kind of growth we want. And what's important about that is anything that is growing by some percentage over time is growing exponentially. So we have to understand exponential growth. The problem is we're humans. We don't understand exponential growth. We think we might. We can use the words, but really understanding it, hard. So, and this is exponential growth, the hockey stick. So to try and bring this home so that we can understand it, I have a little thought experiment. It goes like this. I have a magic eyedropper, and it's magic because the drop of water that comes out of this eyedropper will double every minute. So if I put a drop in your left hand, after a minute you have 2 drops. And after 2 minutes you have 4 drops of water in your hand. And after about 6 minutes you can fill up a thimble. All right? So if you have a sense of that growth, we're going to have to ruin some stadium, so I picked this one at random. Being from Massachusetts, of course. And this is my world you've just walked into. So 2 things happen. First, this park is now watertight. And 2, you are handcuffed to the highest row of bleacher seats. And here's the question. Tomorrow, we do this. You're handcuffed. We start at 12 o'clock in the afternoon. And I put that magic drop of water down on the pitcher's mound. You can't see it. How long do you have to escape from your handcuffs? How long? 50 minutes a day. Think of a number. 3 hours. Turns out you have 50 minutes. So 50 is an awesome guess. Perfect. Now, and I see some skeptics out there. You're thinking, that guy looks like a terrible estimator. Chris is awful. He's probably underestimated the park's volume by 100%. OK, you can think 1251, if that makes you feel better. Not the important question. Actually, this was the important question. At what time is this park still 97% empty space? And how many of you realize the seriousness of your predicament? 12:45. 45 minutes, nothing's happening. There's like 3 feet of water in the infield. 5 more minutes, it's over. All of human history, till 1960, to put the first 3 billion people on the planet, and 40 years to put the next 3 billion people on the planet. That's my way of saying this time is different. We live in very unusual circumstances, monetarily, environmentally, and especially with respect to energy. This is our stadium. There's only so much of it that's here at this point in time, and it's a finite sphere. So understanding that's important. That population graph I put up before was a real one. Green is history, red is a UN projection going into the future. This is where I was born. This is where we are today. If I live to a ripe old age, I will live through a full tripling of human population, which is a rather extraordinary period of time to be alive. It is very extraordinary. And if we look at oil production, which is a chart of consumption, we see it's not a straight line. It's actually one of these funky curved lines, which we have a hard time really understanding, internalized. In fact, we can find these sorts of non-linear charts all over the place. These are some from the environmental sphere. But I could have put up paper clips sold or airline miles traveled or miles of road paved. It wouldn't matter. We're just surrounded by exponential charts, not linear ones. And the key message on this is things speed up towards the end in exponential systems. I mean, how many people here share the impression that things are really speeding up? Whether it's technology or political events or money printing, we are absolutely surrounded by these curved charts. So it's important to understand them. Now, these three E's, something that I've learned that's really important about all three of these things is that none of these are linear systems. Every single one of these is a complex system. Every single one. Environment, economy, energy. All of them are complex systems. Well, why is that important to understand that these are complex systems? It's because systems theory tells us a lot about how complex systems behave. So a question came up before, which was, how could we possibly predict when this is all going to sort of break to a new place? And John Mauldin said, I don't know. And that's the correct answer, because there's two things we know about complex systems. They're inherently unpredictable is the first. That's it. When a fault line is going to let go, we don't know. You're piling up sand one grain at a time. When it slumps, we can't predict it. We can sort of predict if something's going to be a larger or a smaller event, potentially, but when? Unknowable. The second thing we know is that complex systems owe their order, and most importantly, their complexity, to energy. I already gave you this one example, but there are plenty more. If tonight the sun blinked out, the Earth would become a lot simpler place, right? A lot less rich and complex. Energy is a critical component, and this is where the story gets particularly fascinating, specifically oil. Because oil is how we move 95% of everything from point A to point B. You've heard a lot lately that the United States is about to become the next Saudi Arabia, but there's something desperately missing from that narrative, something that is absolutely critically important to understand. So there's a couple of pieces of data that make me go, here's one. Since 2005, the world collectively has doubled its E&P, its exploration and production spending on oil and gas. Doubled it, from $300 billion to $600 billion a year. You would think, wow, if you double your investment in producing a natural resource, you're going to get a whole lot more of that stuff, right? Well, let's wander over and look at total world production of crude and condensate during that same period of time. It's in the same exact band it used to be. So when people say, oh, it's those evil speculators have really driven up the price of oil because the price of oil tripled during this time frame, I say, no, we're spending twice as much to get the exact same amount. That's why the price has gone up. Speculators may play a role, but they're speculating appropriately because world supplies of oil are tight. Of course, Brent crude over $100 a barrel for the past year and a half tells you the same information, but this is the data that underlies that. And so this is a really important piece of information. How many explanations do we have for the idea of doubling our spending and getting the same amount out of the ground? How many ways can we spin that? Turns out there aren't that many. And oil production growing in the US is good for the US, but it's insufficient to solve anything because oil is a global commodity. There's no way for the United States to insulate itself from the world and say, this is just our oil and we're going to use it, because under any scenario, the US is still going to be importing oil as far as the eye can see, no matter the rosiest projection you want for oil sand production, or whatever we want to talk about. And here's some oil supply with fitted trend lines. If you can't see it in the back, we start in 1965, we come through to 2012, and look, there's one period of growth here, the 60s through the 70s, where oil supply was growing at a rate of 7.8% compounded. Then there's the next period, it was growing at about 3.4%, then at about 2%, then at 1.6%, and over the last few years, including everything that the United States has done to produce additional oil, which is awesome, on a worldwide basis, oil growth has slowed to just 0.4%. That's extraordinary. This is a really important big picture idea to hold firmly in line, because this shapes everything, because oil is the master resource. It is how we get economic growth. So until I see additional data coming out that says massive worldwide oil growth, I'm going to be quite bearish on the idea of getting to a fast, rapid resumption of economic growth on a worldwide basis. particularly all of the rescue operations in Europe, are predicated on a rapid return to high nominal and real GDP growth. If that doesn't happen, they break. So this chart is extremely important. All this data comes from the EIA, which is the United States Department of Energy arm that tracks this stuff. So I've broken this oil down into 3 big buckets. The former USSR is on the bottom. You see they coasted along until they had their big, giant economic hiccup and flatlined. And we have, in the red on top, the US, EU, and Japan as a cluster. And then we have the rest of the world. And look what happened in 2008. Something very dramatic happened. We had a changing of the guard. Note that from that period where the oil consumption was falling in the West plus Japan, we've had very difficult economic circumstances. And the rest of the world seems to have had reasonable economic growth. And look, they were increasing their oil consumption. The correlation between oil consumption and economic growth is one of the more robust correlations that you can find out in the data series. It's very high. It's a good correlation. It makes sense, right? It just makes sense. So here's a number I want to leave you with, 22. Anybody who's 22 years old today has been alive when half of all the oil ever burned in human history has been burned. So the question becomes, what do we do for the next 22 years and the next? In fact, this is going to be shortening down because we're increasing our consumption of oil every year by some percentage amount. And that means we're increasing our consumption exponentially. As long as we can continue to do that forever, there are no difficulties. The difficulties come in if you think maybe there's some trouble in that story. There's a similar story in the environment. How long has the Industrial Revolution been going on? 150, 200 years? Well, let's look at this. So when these gentlemen were exploring in Alaska and came across this awesome rock they saw on, actually, it's more awesome than that. It's a copper nugget. And it's not that long ago because the camera was involved. This is what we found when we first started saying, hey, what kind of resources are hanging around? And this is just sitting in a stream bed. That's incredible. Well, we ran out of those right away. That's fine. There were smaller nuggets that we could start to mine and find. Ran out of those, moved on to this awesome ore. Look at that beautiful stuff, that malachite band, 10% ore grade. Fantastic. 10%, meaning 10 pounds of rock, mined, processed, 1 pound of copper. Today, this is a copper mine. It's the largest one in the United States. It's the largest open face mine. And this is in Bingham Canyon. It's 2.5 miles across, about 3/4 of a mile deep. Used to be a mountain. The ore grade here is 0.2%. We're not doing that because we like to keep our engineers busy. We're doing this because that's what's left. We're after 0.2%. So what that means is that now we're going to have to take 500 pounds of ore, drive it all the way up, smelt it, crush it, and then we're going to get that 1 pound of copper that comes out of that. 500 pounds instead of 10. Think of the energy involved in that equation instead of the dollars involved. So here's the main point I want to leave you with. There are no fresh continents. There's no magic veil we're going to lift. There's probably not an Earth on the other side of the sun orbiting just out of sight. The only thing that remotely represents to me a fresh continent is Africa, but it's being picked over even as we speak. And so we're going to have to start to understand that we are at certain limits, that we are starting to run through more and more dilute, deep, diffuse ore grades of the things we need to run our economy as it's been running. And I'm not here to tell you the economy stops working or that it all breaks down, but just to entertain the idea that there's a risk it won't continue to operate as it has been. And I submit to you that within this framework, everything that's happening out there right now makes sense to me because it's saying we're tipping over in this process. So what can we say about those complex systems and all of the ways that they're interrelated? We now have to understand that we can't just look at squeezing an extra couple trillion into this economy over here and expect these other ones to just sort of fire up and work as expected. Things have changed. And that's the dynamic that's really uncomfortable because our high priests and priestesses of money are dancing like crazy and the rain isn't coming down. And that makes the culture feel uncomfortable because they're only looking at this one piece over here and they think that the world has not substantially changed, and it has. It's quite different. So the implications of all this are huge, one being that I think the past becomes a poor guide of the future. Not necessarily an imperfect or an unusable guide, but we have to be open to where the past will be a useful guide and where it might be failing us. And one area it would fail us, I think, is if we said, we just have to dance a little and we will get back to how things used to be. In this story, I believe there's only 3 questions we have to ask ourselves as a nation, maybe as a species. What should we start doing that's new? What should we stop doing that doesn't make sense anymore? And what things should we continue to do? But just pursuing the status quo now, I believe, gives us is going to be an extraordinarily risky thing to pursue because it really puts all our eggs in that one basket. And I truly believe risks are now very badly understood and very badly priced. I actually shrivel up inside a little when I look at junk bond debt at this point in time, yielding 5.6%. I truly think that we know the price of everything, the value of nothing, because our money has been so, we don't have any hard fixed landmarks in this story anymore. But if we back up enough, I think it's very clear to understand where we're going and how we're probably going to get there. I submit to you that in direct opposition to what John Mauldin said, I submit that growth as we knew it is over. Look at the last 10 years in the United States. We've had some roaring economic times, a housing bubble, a little bit of a downturn, but over those last 10 years, the economy grew 1.7% per year. Employment grew 0.1% on an annualized basis. Growth is really hard to come by. I submit to you that the story of understanding where we are on the resource side is an important element to understanding what that is and what the risks might really be going forward. So there's going to be huge shifts in the economy towards the basics. If we're going to spend a lot of energy getting energy, that's great. That area is going to really grow. But if there's not enough to fund and not enough surplus to fund everything, it means that as we grow our energy exploration efforts, we, by necessity, steal from some other aspect of the economy. And the question becomes, which are those? It's a very open question, very difficult to predict because these are complex systems. But the opportunities here are just as enormous. The implications are huge, the opportunities are huge. But the risk is, if we don't see this coming, the chance of being blindsided is very, very, very high. And I'm convinced that our current status quo maintainers at the Fed and at DC are going to pretend as if none of this is true, and they're going to keep pushing along. I'm going to keep my fingers crossed that they have it right and that I'm wrong. But if not, there's a lot that we need to be considering and doing that's fundamentally different.
You would take the growth models that look more like Jeremy Grantham's recent models, where he's projecting about 1% world GDP, as opposed to my more optimistic, muddled through assumptions at 2.
Yeah,
I mean,
you wild optimist.
You guys got the joke. Some of you did, okay? And any use of a decimal place by an economist is clearly a joke. And most people that don't understand data don't get the joke. But for those of us who really understand the data, we know that a decimal is actually the economist equivalent of humor. So, go ahead.
Yeah, I think that 1% is going to be optimistic on a real basis for a while.
But where?
But where, principally, it's going to be, so the chart that really explains it, until I see oil consumption increasing in Japan, US, in the European Union, I'm going to be very bearish on the growth prospects in those particular places. And so
Wait. Oil consumption falling while production is rising is actually positive for growth, not negative for growth. If we become more efficient or we use other forms of energy, isn't that positive?
It is positive. So let's look at the scale of this. This is really important. Okay. So a lot of people say, look, we have all this natural gas. And I'm like, you're absolutely right. And there's not 100 years, there's something less. But if we start to really use that for transportation, because what I'm talking about here is a transportation fuel issue.
Right.
There's a huge scale here, which means we have to produce vehicles that can consume natural gas. We have to have all new pipelines, filling stations, all of that. That'll be incredible trillions of dollars of investment probably. We have a lot of embedded capital in the old petroleum system. We could make that shift. Are we? No. We are not doing that at this point in time. So I would actually be more optimistic if we were going to start using the natural gas.
It's still cheaper to use oil than it is natural gas.
Not today, it isn't.
Well, we haven't gotten to that transition push, and you have to. It is cheaper because you'd have to invest in new infrastructure, new cars. My contention in terms of growth, and we may be getting off the topic, and we'll get to your questions, is that will happen. In fact, I think we're going to see a bear market in automobile production as we get driverless cars, because we'll need fewer cars as a society, because when you want a car in 30 years, you won't actually own one. You'll just think into your computer, which is wired into your brain, and go, need a car. One will show up at the door, you'll get into it, you'll think, take me to, wherever, you'll get in it. And so we'll need exponentially less cars than we do today, because your car sits in your driveway or in parking lots 90% of the time, not being used.
And if that happens, we will lose auto manufacturers, we will lose repair jobs, we will lose filling stations. That'll have huge, devastating impacts on whole portions.
Mean we're not all going to work on farms producing corn and wheat?
I'm not sure how you made that jump, but is there...
Well, it's the same jump. It's the same, help me, John. What were the economists called? The French economists that were the classical, that were the everything is agriculture. This is back in the 1700s, and they were saying, everything is tied to the land, and that's where production. And in 1870, we had a few little technological revolutions that took our 80% of people that were working on farms in 1850, and by 1900, the number one job in the U.S. was household servant. That's where we were migrating to, and it was bumpy. You might not have liked, yes.
I just have one question, which is, and this may or may not bring you two closer, but I'm curious whether it would. Grantham, one of the things that he said is that the increasing cost of extraction is growth without an increase in the standard of living. And I'm wondering whether that might bring you guys closer, but I'll let you guys...
I think at some point the market, the technology substitutes. This is why I'm an irrational optimist.
I totally understand where you're going. We've had 4 major energy transitions in human history. Right? So we basically went from wood to coal, and coal to oil, and maybe now oil into maybe nuclear or something like that. But every time we went across one of these energy transitions, we noted 2 things. The first is we went from a lower to a higher quality energy source. So moving from coal to oil made all the sense in the world. It's a brilliant substance. The second thing is that it took 40 to 60 years for market forces to deliver that transition, and there's a reason for that. If you used to use wind for sailing and steam ships came along and they were better, you probably ran your embedded capital in the wind business ships you owned until they rotted away, and then it made sense to invest. So we have this extraordinary embedded capital in the oil-based system at this point in time. Efficiency changes tend to operate on the order of 1% to 2% per year. The problem is that all of the conventional oil finds that are out there are depleting at the rate of somewhere between 3 and 9%, depending on whether it's an onshore or an offshore oil field. We look at these new tight oil plays, like in the Bakken. An individual well begins depleting the minute you open the spigot. Starts out at about 1,000 barrels per day, loses basically 85% of that production in the next 3 years. So as long as you keep drilling new wells, it's there. But the idea here is that when you're asking if we're going to make a smooth transition to this new fancy future where we have lots of driverless cars, if you say that's going to take 30 to 40 years, which would be a normal market force, I say we don't have that much time.
Sure. I think there are more oil fields, shale oil fields, at a price. I'm not saying we're going to have cheap energy. I'm just saying there's a lot of energy out there, and 10 years from now, our battery technology, the worst investment, the best investment I never made was 5 years ago. I had a chance to invest in this guy that had this little bitty hokey thing that he dipped the rods into his water and electricity kind of came out of the other end, and he was a legitimate rocket scientist, okay? And I could, for $100,000, have gotten maybe 10% of that company. Carlyle and Bush and some other guys took a fraction of one of the implications of his patents for like $50 million a year ago. Dumb. Dumb. I could have been rich. But so, I mean, there's a lot of stuff. I mean, and by the way, that changes our entire concept. What he's doing changes our entire concept of how we store and move and power electricity. And there's a dozen guys out there like this.
I know, and I've
Okay,
studied
let's
it.
go to questions.
I've studied
sir.
it intensely.
You got a first one.
To follow on what John Huffman was saying is maybe what we're measuring in terms of standard of living and growth is what we're looking at. As cool as it is that you can talk on your cell phone from Patagonia, that's not as cool as running water and the ability to use a toilet inside your house. So that each kind of the incremental enhancements to our life are of a very different nature. And is there something in peak prosperity in what you look at, Chris, that tries to measure what we are trying to attain? What is that?
Well, sure. So the question is, the incremental improvements in standard of living, it's very big when you get clean water and sanitation and your food and you've got warmth. There's a really high premium on that stuff. The next layers of that, as grand and as exciting as they are, maybe offer slightly less incremental happiness, benefit, or whatever. Here's the most scary number I know about. Today there are 1 billion people who are middle class existence sorts of humans, and by 2030 the number is projected to go to 3 billion. So we're going to have a complete tripling, if you will, or doubling, depending on how you like to do your math, of people wanting to be in the middle-class lifestyle, which is very highly consumptive. If you go to China, it's extraordinary. I can't wait to hear what's happening in China. But they've just gone bursting into the same middle-class lifestyle. The resource use that entails is extraordinary. So when we look into this story, all I'm saying is these resources are very clearly harder to come by. So right now, the oceans have been completely depleted. You want bluefin tuna, I'm sorry. They're 95% gone, maybe more. Money won't bring them back. We've already hit limits on certain things, and money can't fix it. So this is just a story of saying, if we want the future to look exactly like the past, there's a high chance of being disappointed in that outcome. What are the key risks, and how should we look at those? Yeah, question here?
Why it seems like from your data, the pretty clear implication is that what it's really bearish for is the emerging market countries, right? So you look at US, Japan, Europe, basically all the major developed regions have become more efficient in their usage of oil and are driving towards more efficiency, right? I mean, fuel efficiency is increasing in the United States. Chevron is running ads everywhere, and so on and so forth about fuel efficiency. It's just sort of in the air. Meanwhile, China is about to displace the United States as the largest importer of oil, even though its economy is only 1/3 the size of the US. It would seem like this resource constraint, what's really going to bite, is in the inefficient users of oil, not the efficient users.
Maybe, maybe not. So an important concept here is, what are participants willing to pay for that marginal barrel of oil? So to somebody in a developing nation, they might be willing to pay $300, $400, $500 a barrel, because putting a gallon into your scooter and getting all of your ducks to market has a very different utility for that person than somebody who's like, well, should I drive an extra 10 miles to get my kids off to soccer or something like that at this point in time? They're poor, but they're willing to pay more. Europe already pays the equivalent of $400 a barrel.
They're willing to pay more on a marginal unit of consumption relative to the last unit of consumption, but not on an absolute dollar basis.
No, on an absolute basis. Absolutely they are. They're willing to pay more, and they can. China's already outbidding us for oil, and they will continue that.
Here that we've clearly poked something.
I'd like to, I kind of agree with both of what you're saying. I agree that we're going to move to a world where the cars will be, you'll sum up, you have like cars to go, you've got zip cars and so forth. But I disagree with the fact that in India and, say, China, that they're less efficient. If you see the way tuk-tuks are used, or if ever driven in New Delhi, you will see that per gallon of fuel to move people and produce from point A to point B, they are way more efficient than we are. They are, I would say, 100 times more efficient. Because you see these little things go by, natural gas tuk-tuks, that are just, you think, oh my God, this is a danger. So they're way more efficient. So I'm wondering if it's going to be the reverse. That the pinch is actually going to be on us, because we kind of, like you were saying, it's the soccer game, and I didn't think about it. When I look at the cars around here, I
In my big Infinity that I love.
Yeah, the Infinity.
But I drove a Prius out here. Last time I would ever get in that kind of metal. Give me my
All right, perfect illustration.
But yeah, I may be challenged.
And what if the pinch that we're going to be forced to become more efficient on the other side because the third world is accelerating in their and they're able to put more productive use?
Right, and the major point here is that, I didn't have time to put all the other charts up here, but we're approaching this period of what I consider to be persistently, sustainably high energy prices, at least for oil, with the highest levels of debt ever recorded in our country's history. I know it's backed off a little bit. We're not including liabilities. We're still over 350% debt to GDP. Japan's over 250% just at their federal level equivalent. And we're entering this period price to perfection. We need massive cheap resources, and so that's a tension that's really there that needs to be open and resolved. And I'm concerned that the Federal Reserve doesn't have anybody really looking at where we are in the oil story and what high oil prices actually mean to a money system as they're trying to recreate it and pump it.
Hey, thank you, that was very interesting. So clearly you're pessimistic on growth, but at the end of your talk you said there's a lot of tremendous opportunities. Could you describe some of those opportunities?
Yeah, so clearly there's going to be a huge premium put on efficiency. There are companies, so here's the thing. We don't need any new technologies to be built today. We don't need a mad scientist to discover something in a Palo Alto garage tonight. We have all the technology we need to make better decisions today and to do things in a much more efficient way, but we don't. So let me give you an example. What if I told you I have a magic technology that could lower the amount of carbon dioxide we put in the atmosphere, save you a ton of money, would give us increased national security. It could be domestically built and sourced, maintained. So it would be a jobs program. It fits, in fact, if you care about social justice, this will help people spend less on energy. I'd hope you say, yeah, let's bring it on. It's called solar hot water panels. Totally unsexy. 1970s technology. It's a black box and it's a pump. And it collects heat from the sun. They're great at it. Some countries mandate that you have to put those in a new building because they make all the sense in the world. I'll guarantee you 90% of the people in this room or more have water that's heated by natural gas, electricity, or oil. And all of those are fossil fuels. So we are using fossil fuels to do something that we could, right now, do in a very different way. That's economically, I have solar hot water heaters on my house, and I calculated spreadsheet. Oil stays at $3.50 a gallon. And I'm going to get a triple-digit return, probably about 150% IRR on this investment. So that it's not that the question becomes, why aren't we doing that? And the answer is we don't have the right narrative. If we have a narrative that says the future is infinite, we'll always get more energy, humans are clever, and we don't have to really start doing things different, we'll continue down that status quo path when we have these other things that make all the sense in the world that we could be doing, but we're not. So there's lots of things we can do, but there's huge opportunities in all those things that make sense, and they are just flat out common sense. I hate to do this, but I'm going to, at the back end of my book, I talk about a bunch of these actual ideas that sort of contain in that, and we're collecting at our website all of these ideas of people who are actually finding new ways to invest in things that make sense into this new world. And guess what? Here's the magic part. Whether this turns out to be true or not, these all still turn out to be awesome investments and things that we should be doing and maybe aren't at this point in time.
Thank you very, very much.